This is a diminished chords guitar lesson. This video is a complete tutorial and an ultimate guide on how to use diminished chords on the guitar. I'll show you everything you need to know to understand diminished chords and diminished seventh chords and how to use them effectively and tastefully. If you're a songwriter, if you're an improviser, if you want to play your favorite songs and understand them, or if you're just curious about theory, then this lesson is for you because diminished chords and diminished seventh chords are used in almost every genre of music. So no matter what you're into, understanding this fascinating and mind-blowing chord type is going to help you out. We're going to cover 7 things in this comprehensive diminished chords guitar lesson. First, I'm going to very quickly define and explain diminished triads, diminished seventh chords, and half diminished chords and where they come from. Then I'll show you the 3 diminished 7 chord shapes that you need to know. After that, I'll show you how those 3 chord shapes actually equal 12 guitar chord voicings because the diminished 7 structure is symmetrical and it inverts to itself. You'll see what I mean. After that, I'll show you the coolest part, the reason that diminished seventh chords are so powerful, which is how they can be used as chromatic chords and how diminished seventh chords can resolve to add tension and resolution to any chord progression. Then I'll show you how diminished seventh chords are most commonly used, which is as passing chords. After that, we'll get to the kind of mind-blowing part, which is how we can use diminished seventh chords to modulate, to actually change keys to any key quite easily. And lastly, I want to show you how I improvise freely all over the guitar with diminished seventh chords to express myself and to find song ideas by implementing the techniques from this video. That is what we're going to cover. Let's get into it. By the way, I'm Jared Borkowski from soundguitarlessons.com, where I teach musicianship skills on the guitar so we can express ourselves more freely. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe and follow. I have new videos every week. Let's quickly define the types of diminished chords. Very often if someone says diminished, they're actually talking about diminished seventh, and I do that too. I said diminished and I'm using diminished seventh, but there is a diminished triad. Let's understand that first. We're going to play C, 3rd fret, 5th string, and everything that I try to understand structure-wise, whether it's a chord structure or a scale structure, I want to see it really clearly along one string. This helps me just see it in this very simplistic linear fashion, so I can see, okay, a minor third up from that first note, this is the root, that's the flat 3 of the chord, and so this has 1 flat 3, and a diminished triad has flat 5. And what we want to see by doing this is that there's 2 distances that are the same thing, which is a minor third up, minor third up. So 2 minor thirds. This is 1, flat 3, flat 5. The reason it is called a diminished triad is because of the flat 5, which technically that interval is called a diminished fifth. So this is a minor third, which a minor chord does as well, but it also has a diminished fifth. So it is called a diminished triad. Where this chord comes from is that it is the 7th chord of a major key. If you want to see a bunch of chords through keys and the exact shapes for them, including the diminished chord, you can get my chord chart called Chords with Color. Shows 5 different keys, a bunch of chords through a bunch of options for chords. There's a link in the top of the description to get that. And one of the things it will show us is chords through the key of C. So we'll have C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and here's that 7th chord, and it's just built into the key. So that's where diminished triad comes from. It's the 7th chord of the major scale. Let's talk about diminished seventh for a second. If we take that same structure off C, we go a minor third up to flat 3, a minor third up again to flat 5. A diminished 7th chord adds on another note that is once again a minor third up. So we get the same distance, same distance, same distance. This is a symmetrical chord structure because if you go up another minor third, you get back to C. Okay, so we have the root, the flat 3, the flat 5. This is called the double flat 7, and then goes up to the root again. Why is that one note called double flat 7? It's quite straightforward, actually, because the diminished 7th chord naturally exists as the 7th chord, different way of saying 7th chord, as the 7th chord in the harmonic minor scale. So if this is the root of the harmonic minor scale, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, 7, 1. So the chord that naturally is built off of that 7th note of the scale is diminished 7. Check out my video on the chords through the harmonic minor scale to understand that better. There's a link in the description. But if we just count from the root of the diminished chord that we were outlining here, and we just don't even say flat or sharp or any of the numbers, we just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That note that we call double flat 7 lands as the 7th note. And there's already a 6, so you can't call it, there's a flat 6, you can't call it natural 6. So that's a little confusing, don't worry about it, but it's just that it naturally is from a scale and that you count the numbers, and if it lands as the 7th number, you have to call it some kind of 7. So it's not 7, it's not flat 7, it's one step below flat 7, but it is the 7th note of the scale when you count it off of the diminished chord root, so therefore it's double flat 7. If that's confusing, don't worry, that's not totally necessary to take advantage of how awesome this chord is and everything else we're talking about, but it's worth pointing out since that label, double flat 7, is kind of strange and deserves an explanation. So that double flat 7, I call it that as a chord tone, but as an interval, double flat 7 is called a diminished 7th interval. This is why the name of the diminished 7th chord exists. It's a diminished 7th chord because it has a diminished 7th interval in it. That's not how every chord name works across the board, but that's how this one works. It actually has a diminished 7th chord interval, and it also has a diminished 5th in it, which we'll come back to in a minute. So here's an exercise to do that is really great to get the sound in your ear and understand the structure, which is make sure you first can just do what we did along one string, minor third, minor third, minor third. You're seeing, we really need to see and feel how this is symmetrical. And then what I challenge you to do is to make sure you can cross strings with a minor third. So from this note to the next string, what's the minor third physical distance? In this case, crossing strings over, I'm going to go 2 frets over and 1 string up, and then minor third up, minor third up. So the exercise I want you to try is to try to go from the lowest note, or one of these 3 lowest notes, start on any of these, go up, minor third, keep going, cross strings whenever you want, and try to go all the way as high as you can, and then come back down. So minor third, minor third, minor third, minor third. Okay, I'm on the top string now. You don't have to go to the highest note, but just get back down to where we started by crossing wherever you want to and going minor third constantly. Really great kind of mapping theory exercise on the fretboard. And by doing that, you're literally just playing a diminished 7th chord arpeggio from your lowest possible note to the highest possible and back. Very cool. So when I think of song examples that use the diminished 7th chord, one of the first ones that comes to mind is a song called How Insensitive by Antonio Carlos Jobim. Bossa Nova music uses a ton of diminished 7th chords, even though many, many other genres do as well. But this song comes to mind where we have D minor triad, and then it goes down a half step to C sharp diminished 7. So right away we can interpret this in the way that we talked about, where the diminished 7th chord is the 7th chord. It's the final chord that just naturally comes from the harmonic minor scale. So this would be the 1 chord of D harmonic minor. This would be the 7th chord of D harmonic minor. So you could think of those as coming from the same scale. The melody, it's just at the beginning goes, how insensitive. Then it moves on and changes a bunch of keys. So it goes all over the place, but those first 2 chords, you could loop those and then play a harmonic minor scale over it. Let's do that real quick. So I'm going to loop this. And then the next one. And just that. Whether I got a good loop or not, I don't know, but check out my video on how to learn and practice the harmonic minor scale if you're interested in playing around with that scale. And then there's half diminished. And why is it called half diminished? It's also called minor 7 flat 5. That's the exact same chord. So why is there half diminished? And in contrast to that, the diminished 7th chord is often referred to as fully diminished or full diminished. Well, here's what's going on with that. If we take our arpeggio again, we're going to have 1, we're going to have flat 3, we're going to have flat 5. And instead of double flat 7, we're going to have regular flat 7 or just flat 7. So 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. We should see that as a whole step or 2 frets below C. 2 frets below the root, so root, flat 7, and then flat 5, flat 3, and the root. So why is it called half diminished? Well, let's go back to diminished 7 for a second, which is often called fully diminished 7 or full diminished 7. Well, full diminished 7 has 1, flat 3, flat 5, which is diminished 5th, and then double flat 7, which is diminished 7. So it has two things that are diminished in it, okay? Half diminished has just one of those. It has half of them. So it's half diminished versus fully diminished. So half diminished has that diminished 5th, it has the flat 5, but it does not have the diminished 7. It does not have a double flat 7. If you want to know more about where these chords come from, how to map out the fretboard and see chord construction better for any types of chords, then definitely check out my chord theory playlist. Now I'm going to show you the 3 physical shapes of diminished 7th chords that you definitely want to know on the guitar to use all of the cool stuff that we're going to still talk about in this video. Here's the 6-string rooted version. We're skipping the A string, and there's a couple ways to place the left-hand fingers here. You can bar with your first finger here and put your third finger down here. I also actually quite like playing with the tips of my fingers, third finger, first finger, fourth finger, and middle up there. So that's the 6th string rooted off C. This is how I want you to practice these. This is off C on the 5th string. This is a really nice, easy to play chord shape, all the tips of the fingers. And then let's go ahead up here off C as well, all the tips of the fingers, little kind of a box shape there. So the way I want you to practice these is to rotate through them like this. You can choose different roots, that's just off of C, but that's to get used to those. So now that you know those 3 physical chord shapes, check this out. Usually when we learn chords and we want to multiply our voicings of those chords by using inversions, we have to put in a lot of work. So for example, if I play major 7 chord and I learn 3 of those, major 7 chord, major 7 chord, major 7 chord, and then I want to expand my voicings of them by learning inversions, well, first inversion, major 7 chord, I have to learn this shape. The second inversion, major 7 chord, I have to learn this shape. Not only are they physically hard to play, you just have to rearrange your fingers and relearn this. Okay, so here's major 7 here. This is the second inversion, major 7, first inversion. Don't worry about the details of those, but it's just new shape, new shape, new shape, drill, drill, drill. Very worth doing. I love working on that. But the diminished 7th chords, we get all of those as a freebie. Because it's symmetrical, because we learned that it's a minor third on a minor third on a minor third, and if you keep going, you land back on the root minor third. It's symmetrical. And so therefore, every minor third distance, every 3 frets, you can play the same physical shape and you get an inversion of what you just played. So this is the same exact chord as this, and as this, and as this, and as this. Those are all the same exact notes, just placed in a different order. So they're all inversions of the shape inverts to itself is the way that I like to explain it. So all of these. So what I want you to practice here is take each shape and just practice visualizing and being able to go up a minor third and move around that way. And this is what you'll hear all the time. It's like an old movie soundtrack kind of sound that we might think of it as that. But also you'll hear it often if you get used to that and play it. You'll hear it often in people's improvisations. I was just listening to a record with Julian Lodge and Bill Frisell, and there's a moment in there where sure enough you hear him just go up that diminished chord and then resolve, which we're going to talk about next. That exact little figure is used in Michelle by the Beatles. Michelle, my belle, these are words that go together well, my Michelle. Whoa. There it is. So hopefully you're going to practice just going up and down minor thirds with each shape. Takes a little getting used to, but it's really straightforward. But just like we practiced crossing strings before, with the single notes, I want you to cross strings with the shapes as well. So go from your lowest somewhere down here, kind of low, go up a minor third, up a minor third, whenever you want to. Cross strings, and get as high as you feel comfortable, and then go down, cross strings. So the exercise here is being able to do it along the strings, but then being able to cross strings, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, low as you can, as high as you can, back down. We'll be doing a lot more of that in just a second when we're going to use this to resolve and modulate to new places harmonically. Okay, this next part is where it really starts to get game changing. This is where we're using diminished seventh chords as chromatic chords. But before we do that, I have to explain how with these inversions that we just learned, how it inverts to itself, and with the functionality that we talked about, how it's the seventh chord of the harmonic minor scale, like in that progression from how insensitive. Well, the purpose of this chord, how it functions, is that it causes tension and then it resolves, right? You can hear that wanting to go somewhere. I have a video on functional harmony that explains that really well, so check that out if you are interested. But let's look at this for a second and say we're doing our little progression that was D minor to C sharp diminished. Well, because of our inversions, I just want to show you this real quickly. Because of our inversions, you can move around with those and then resolve to that same chord. So D minor, and then C sharp, right? I still just went C sharp diminished to D minor, but I ended up at a different place, D minor, by moving it around so much. So we're not moving harmonically yet, but we're just letting that voicing really become quite dynamic. The way to start doing this is to have a way for yourself to think of how a diminished seventh chord can resolve. What direction should it go? Really, it can go so many places because of this shape being, any of these notes are the root of this shape, depending on where we are in that whole inversion thing. So a simple way to think of it, if you want to just think of it this way, it works really well. Think of your lowest note, and if you're on a diminished seventh chord shape, that this lowest note can resolve up to a major chord or a minor chord anytime, and that lowest note can resolve down to a major chord or a minor chord anytime. So it's going to resolve down a whole step or up a half step. So if you play these anywhere and you play all around, you end up here. You think, okay, there's my lowest note. I can resolve up a half step to a major chord or a minor chord, or I can resolve down a whole step to a major chord or a minor chord. In our case, I was still trying to resolve to D minor, so I'm going up to D minor. So I often just think of it that way, but you can also just say, anytime you're on any of these shapes, any of these notes function the same way. If that is the note you're thinking of, and I'm thinking of these notes as kind of pointing to a resolution. They're kind of pointing to where they want to go. So if I'm thinking top note, don't even worry about what note it is, but just say, well, this top note could be the root, or it could be the leading tone, or it doesn't matter what we call it. This top note, I can resolve to a chord whose root is a half step above that. Okay, so you could do whatever you need to think of that. Here's this note. Half step above it happens to be B. Okay? Oh, that works. And we hear it's in a new tonality from where we were before. Or how about this one? Half step above or whole step below? Okay, well, a whole step below this note here is D. Okay, so there's that D minor resolution. So you can think of it that way. Any of these notes, half step above or whole step below. So that's pretty crazy. So really you're right here. All four of these can go half step above or whole step below to a major or minor chord. So that's many, many, many options. Now, where it starts to get really cool is when you take that ability that we just learned, where you understand the structure and where it can resolve to, and then we let ourselves just place it in front of and point towards any chord that is in the key. So if we're just in the key of C, is the 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, that kind of stuff is in my chord theory series. If you don't quite understand that, that's okay. Go check out that series. But if you know these chords that are just kind of numbered through the key, well, you can take that diminished 7 idea of pointing it towards something and just place it a half step below or a whole step above to resolve to something in the key. And you can do that with any of the chords. So this is called a chromatic chord. I have a video on chromatic chords. Check that out if you want to learn more about that. It's kind of like a dominant 7-to-1 function, which then you're putting that in front of other chords. There's something called a secondary dominant. This is also called an applied dominant. Just throwing some vocabulary terms out there. Don't worry about if you understand them. Worry about if you understand this to this, and just being able to practice that. Point of saying all that is that this is called a secondary diminished 7th chord or an applied diminished 7th chord, which is a nice term for it because you are applying it to whatever chord you want to apply it to. Okay, so we have our C chord, we have our 2 chord of the key, we have our 3 chord of the key. Okay, what if we want to go back to the 2 chord and we want to apply a diminished 7th chord to it? Okay, I played this because it's a whole step above the 2 chord, and there it resolves to it, right? So let's take a song example. What if you're playing Hallelujah, and you're just inspired by it, right? And you want to make it your own, you want to do something with it, and you're like, okay, well, I just want to like use this as a starting point. We're not even tweaking the song, we're just going to say, well, that's cool, I love this sound, this is the 1 to the 6 chord. Well, what if I just throw a diminished 7th chord, an applied diminished 7th chord, a secondary diminished 7th chord in front of the A minor, so it's not just this. You could go, okay, and I extended the progression, everything, so now it's something completely different. It's not that song anymore. That's okay, that's how things evolve, that's how we get our own ideas, etc. So I just took that progression. Wow, I love 1 to 6, back and forth, but maybe it's feeling a little plain one day. Throw that spice in there to target it. And you can do this by stretching out the progression and adding the chord in like we just did. So it's really changing the progression, it's really adding a new chord, or you can play that in like one beat preceding the chord. And then you're not actually changing the chord progression, you're just adding this little kind of passing tone chromatic flavor for a second. You can do these kinds of things with any chord progression, and I have a whole series on the most common chord progressions, so check that out if you want to get some really common chord progressions and then start playing around with them. So here's the most common way that diminished 7th chords are used in music, which is as passing chords, as chromatic diminished passing chords. It's functioning exactly how we just talked about, with applied chords, secondary diminished chords, that type of thing, targeting, resolving, pointing towards something, but specifically on a path between chords. So if we're in that key of C where we have C major, D minor, E minor, well, there's a whole step between C and D. So if you connect between them by going up a half step from C and then you're pointing towards D minor, then you have just used a chromatic diminished passing chord. D minor leading to E minor. Now E minor to F are half step apart already in the key. So to do this exercise that I would do it through a whole key, I would create that diminished chord on the same root, on the E leading to F, okay? F to G are usually in the key, okay? So this is exactly the exercise that I would actually recommend that you do. I'd recommend you do this off the 6th string, off the 5th string, and off the 4th string. So I might take like the key of F, play the 1 chord, play the diminished 7th chords that is targeting the 2 chord. Here's the 2 chord. Target the 3 chord. Here's the 3 chord. Target the 4 chord. Notice I'm applying it to the next chord. That's how I'm referring to it. Okay, I'm targeting the 4th chord. Okay, target the 5 chord. Here's the 5 chord. Target the 6 chord next. Sounds so good. Okay, a couple examples of this being used in real music. There's a beautiful old classic song called Till There Was You. There were bells on a hill, but I never heard them ring. Just those first 3 chords, 1 chord, passing diminished chord, 2 chord. Another example is Blackbird by the Beatles. This section right here, it's exactly this happening. This is the 4 chord, diminished passing chord to the 5 chord, diminished passing chord to the 6 chord. It's exactly that. 4, diminished, 5, diminished, 6. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. What we've done so far is called tonicizing. The tonic is the 1 chord of a key. It's the tonal center of a key. Usually that's the place that tension is created to resolve back to. So when we tonicize something that is not the 1 chord, that is what we're doing with the chromatic chords, the applied, the secondary diminished chord. Same with secondary dominance. You are tonicizing something other than the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, something like that. So you're making this momentary feeling of it being the main home base, and then you land on it. But when you land on it, you're actually like, nope, we're still in that key. Now we're on the 2 chord, and now we're on the 3 chord, whatever it is. So that's tonicizing. We're not actually changing keys. We're not actually modulating. So something exciting here is with diminished chords is that we can just totally change keys and totally modulate pretty much anywhere. Let me just jump to an extreme example first, right off the bat. The circle of fifths, or the circle of fourths, depending on which way you're going on it. One of the reasons it exists and one of the reasons it's useful is that it shows us what keys are most related to each other. The keys next to any other key is the most related key. It's one note is one half step different any direction you go by one key. So that means the key that is on the opposite side of the circle is the most distant key, the most different notes that you can possibly have. Well, modulating typically is done in a way where you try to do it to a nearby key, and you can do that in kind of a smooth way. But right away we can see how powerful the diminished chord is. What if we wanted to modulate to the most distant key from C, which would be F sharp? Okay, and if you go to this diminished chord that is a half step below C, so it's targeting back on C, makes perfect sense. But then you mess around with that a bit and you move around and you realize, oh, if I move around, look where I am now. I'm a half step below or a whole step above F sharp, and I've just resolved to this key that is the furthest key away from C. So everything in between is possible as well. So if I'm going to the 2 chord, 1 chord, and then I try to tonicize that 2 chord like I'm going to go to it, but then I just move around and maybe resolve to B major instead by using the logic that we had before. Oh, it's a half step above from where I was. I resolved to B major, which was a very different place than it would have maybe gone if I was just targeting that next passing chord to the 2 chord. So you can go anywhere. You can play around with this like crazy to actually modulate and change keys. To technically have changed keys, then you want to sit in that other key, kind of use it for a minute, do a section of a song that way, improvise there for a while, whatever it is that you're doing, and then find a way to get back and explore things this way. So whether you're doing a subtle key change or something extreme, the diminished chord can be your wormhole, your portal that gets you there in a very smooth musical way. So lastly, I just want to show you how with all of that stuff, I use all of it when I'm just totally freely improvising on the guitar. I like to just play in kind of some kind of tonality, but I don't stick there for long. And I think a lot in functional harmony. And I'm just sharing this with you because it's really part of my creative process and part of my playing. So any chord I'm on, I really let myself go anywhere and do anything. So I'm playing this A dominant 7th chord right now. I'll just really move it anywhere. With every chord, I'm thinking of what could it do, where could it go? It doesn't have to be in a key. Sometimes I'm really not thinking in a key, but I'll resolve this. So for this moment, I'm thinking in G minor, G blues. I went to the diminished chord. I'm going to kind of overuse this since we're talking about diminished chords, but it's something that I'll use often just when it feels right, okay? So now I can resolve to anything I want with this and just start fresh. So I might go to, because it was a whole step above E, now I'm in E, so I'm going to just play there. And I'm okay if it's not totally cohesive. I'm exploring. I did the same thing, not on purpose, it's just what was working. There's the tonic of C, or the root note of C, of E, not C. And that's a great spot to hit that diminished chord and start to go somewhere else. Now, totally new place and flavor now. So I'm really moving all over the place. I'm not thinking I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here, I'm going to modulate to this. I'm just like, where am I right now in this moment, and where can that tension resolve to? So I ended up in F here. I was playing I don't remember where I came from. So it's just really a very kind of flow state kind of process. And when I hit something that just feels amazing, maybe I repeat it some, maybe it turns into kind of a compositional idea, or I just continue to work on it as an improvisational idea. But just wanted to demonstrate a little bit how important that one technique, the diminished seventh chord, and everything that it can do, how it can move around and modulate, is really an important part of my personal creative flow when I'm just playing, when I'm improvising, when I'm composing, when I'm songwriting, when I'm searching for ideas, when I'm trying to find inspiration, all of that stuff. It's not the only thing, but it's a pretty big one because it can take you from anywhere to anywhere. A very practical example too is at a gig, a certain kind of gig, where I'm just playing music, background music, that is provided for a function or something like that. Very common kind of performance kind of gig that I've done many, many times. I'm playing some repertoire music and I want to not stop playing and connect from one to the other. Well, improvise a little bit, and whatever key I was in to wherever I'm going, whatever tempo, whatever anything, that diminished seventh chord comes up as an important tool to get me from one place to the other. So it's not required to use it that way, but it's a really fun way to just kind of keep playing, connect things, move one idea to the next, see how all music is just connected as a web of information that we can just grab a little here, grab a little there, and see how it's all kind of more the same than it is different. If you want to learn more about chords, chord voicings, chords through keys, like the 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, that kind of thing, adding colors to chords, that is extended notes, which are color notes, then get my chord chart called Chords with Color. It's totally free. There's a link in the top of the description to grab that, or you can go to soundguitarlessons.com/chordswithcolor. Now you know so much about diminished seventh chords, definitely enough to be dangerous with them. I hope you have fun playing around with something from that lesson. There's a lot to grab from there, so grab something and see if you can have fun playing with that. I didn't mention one thing in this video, and that is how diminished seventh chords are so often used. The diminished seventh chord shapes, the exact ones we played, are used as rootless voicings of dominant 7, flat 9. Well, I didn't mention it because I already did a whole video on exactly that. It has a bunch of visuals and diagrams for you to check it out and follow along. And especially after this video, you'll probably get the hang of that concept pretty well. So I highly recommend that you check that out next. There'll be a link in the top of the links mentioned section in the description, or you can go to the link on this screen right now if you're watching on YouTube. I post a new lesson video every week. I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Take care and happy practicing.